I don't know. Breathe less? Answered Thomas. It was cold and clammy in the tunnel, but beads of sweat poured from Thomas's forehead. All of a sudden, a tiny switch came into view. The boy reached out with a trembling finger and turned it off. The relentless droning of the sound of the magnet came to an immediate halt, and the cavern was plunged into silence. The sounds of bat wings flapping and snakes slithering about were a welcome change. Violet noticed that her own breathing had become laboured. She opened her mouth to speak, but Thomas shushed her. He was sending McGrowl a message, and for the first time since they had fallen into that dreadful tunnel, McGrowl was receiving it. The message let McGrowl know precisely where the children were, that they were safe and that they didn't have much time left. Von Vleck stared at McGrowl. McGrowl stared at the cat. He made a quick but calculated decision. He started barking loudly, then he leapt to his feet and in a single thrust of his powerful limbs tore through the strong ropes that bound him. As Muchnick heard the noise and came running into the room, Von Vleck reached frantically for the switch to turn on the portable electromagnet. The cat, startled by the dog, made a leap away from the window, knocking into the device. As Von Vleck reached for the switch, the electromagnet teetered and fell out of the window. Before either of the evil duo had a chance to retrieve it, McGrowl was out of the window like a bolt of lightning, hurtling towards the mansion. "We're getting the dog now, and I'm killing you later," Muchnick screamed as he and his accomplice sped out of the back of the house. They had to get to McGrowl before he got to the children. They ran to a nearby grating that covered what appeared to be an entrance to a sewer. The entrance led to a secret passageway to a series of underground tunnels in which Thomas and Violet were trapped. "Faster! Faster!" Muchnick grunted through clenched teeth. In seconds, the evil duo had lowered themselves down a ladder to a waiting motorcycle. Soon they were careening forward through the tunnels in a desperate attempt to head off McGrowl before he had a chance to save the children. McGrowl arrived at the mansion and instantly started ripping apart the bars that covered the opening through which the children had fallen. A beeper sound in Muchnick's pocket, ever the master of devious planning, Muchnick had triggered the device to go off the moment the bars were disturbed. "Faster, stupid!" Von Vleck screamed into the Muchnick's ear as they sped through the cavernous tunnels. "Sticks and stones! Sticks and stones!" he yelled in reply. Then he shoved the woman with such force he nearly knocked her over. Von Vleck desperately grabbed Muchnick's head, nearly blocking his already dim view of the path ahead. The speedometer on the motorcycle read 80 miles per hour as the evil strangers sped forward over the bumpy terrain. McGrowl hurtled through the darkened tunnels with the speed of a roaring locomotive. Already his super-hearing could detect the distant sounds of the children's laboured breathing. He didn't have a minute to lose. His sensitive eyes were able to capture and magnify the few available microns of light trapped within the cavern. He quickly spotted the children's footprints and raced to save them. Thomas and Violet heard the approaching whoosh as McGrowl drew nearer. "What if he doesn't see us?" Violet gasped. The supply of air in the underground chamber was almost gone, and even Thomas was becoming lightheaded. And then Muchnick's motorcycle turned a sharp corner. Von Vleck spotted a tornado-like vortex that was McGrowl speeding directly at them. Just as the motorcycle and the dog were about to collide, Von Vleck reached into her pocket and pulled out yet another portable electromagnet. Before you could blink, she had that device up and running and aimed right at her nemesis. "Gotcha!" she cried triumphantly. In an instant, the tornado that had been McGrowl turned into a tired and somewhat shaky golden retriever. The dog didn't need to hear the buzzing to understand immediately what had transpired. He had once again been successfully zapped by the electromagnetic force. Thomas and Violet used their last remaining breath to call out for help. Even without his super-hearing, McGrowl could hear their tired cries. He tried to head in the direction of their voices. Although hidden behind a solid wall of granite, They were no more than 30 feet from where he stood. "Where do you think you're going, Blondie?" Von Vleck taunted as she turned up the intensity on her transmitter. McGrowl felt as though he weighed 1,000 pounds. Every muscle in his body ached with exhaustion, but he continued to drag his tired frame toward his cherished friends. He could tell from their voices that he didn't have much time left. McGrowl was beginning to lose hope. In another few seconds, he would pass out from the effects of the electromagnet. Thomas and Violet's chances of survival were looking dimmer and dimmer. Von Vleck walked slowly toward him, aiming the magnet right at him. The rays were so powerful, the poor dog could barely stand upright. Muchnick was besotted with excitement. He had won! Or so he thought. Suddenly, a low rumbling sound filled the cavern. The vibrations generated by the electromagnet had weakened the already crumbling ceiling right above Muchnick and Von Vleck's heads. Dust and pebbles began to trickle down. Muchnick and Von Vleck ignored the menacing sound. "Soon you'll be mine," he gloated, "and those horrible children will cease to exist. Oh, happy day!" Muchnick grabbed Von Vleck, and the two of them began to dance wildly about, screaming and yelling and laughing. They were blissfully unaware of the disaster of their hysterical gyrations were about to wreak upon them. Suddenly rocks started raining down from above. Big ones, little ones, sharp ones, and smooth ones. The walls were caving in. Dust was everywhere. Neither Muchnick nor Von Vleck were anywhere to be seen, apparently buried under a mountain of rubble. The portable electromagnet lay smashed and ruined under a pile of rocks. McGrowl felt his superpowers surging back into his tired limbs. He hadn't a moment to waste. He tunneled through the piles of debris that surrounded him. In less than a second, he burrowed a tunnel right through to his friends. There they were, Thomas and Violet crumpled on the floor in a sad little heap. But they were alive. The boy managed to lift his head and whisper hoarsely to his favourite companion, "I knew you'd save us, McGrowl. I never doubted you for a second." In the twinkling of an eye, McGrowl had Thomas and Violet on his sturdy shoulders. Soon the three friends were flying through the tunnels, back to the tiny entrance, and as far away from the front porch as McGrowl could manage. The distant drone of the sonic waves had weakened not just the ceiling above Muchnick and Von Vleck, but the ancient walls that supported the maze of the tunnels and caverns in which the children had been trapped as well. As the walls and ceilings collapsed, torrents of raging water previously held at bay by the tunnels were suddenly released. The very place where Thomas and Violet had stood only moments ago was transformed instantly into a churning mass of earth and stone. The decrepit old house began to crumble. The ground beneath the fleeing trio began to tremble. They were 1/2 a mile away from the mansion when it happened. What sounded like a dozen rapid claps of thunder caused McGrowl to slow down and the children to cover their ears. Weakened by the roiling destruction beneath it, the old house was falling in upon itself. Within seconds, the Compton mansion, Muchnick's childhood sanctuary, was reduced to a dusty pile of bricks and wood. Given the catalysmic nature of the event, it seemed likely that Muchnick and Von Vleck had suffered a similar fate. The dog stopped for a moment, and the three friends took a long look back. Thomas and Violet watched in awed silence. Even McGrowl had to admit the call had been closer than he could have possibly imagined. And then he sent Thomas a message. "Translation, please," Violet said, feeling somewhat left out. Thomas quickly explained that McGrowl wanted to know if they could still go to the dog show. It was starting in 5 minutes. Negative eons and a near brush with death weren't about to slow this puppy down. The dog sent Thomas an image of the largest silver trophy he had ever seen. Thomas beamed. "I wouldn't miss it for anything," was Thomas's instant reply. McGrowl let out an excited woof, and took off like a speeding bullet as Violet and Thomas held on for dear life. In another second they were careening past Thomas's house. The dog reminded the children to hold on even tighter, making a series of bounding leaps over streets, people, traffic jams, even buildings. They had to duck to avoid a gaggle of geese that were heading south for the winter. In another second the soccer field came into view. Thomas could see the crowded bleachers and hear Principal Grimble's resounding bullhorn. They landed just behind the viewing stands and scrambled madly to get to their places. Thomas's mother spotted them immediately. She smiled, pointed at her watch and shook her head. They had arrived with just 5 seconds to spare.